We've had quite an interesting year within vet services as we've gone through the reorganization. Let's see, did I go too far? As we've gone through the reorganization, but Dr. Sutton and Dr. Huddleston are still part of the Scrapie program, and we're here to help you, and we're here to make sure our stakeholders our concerns, our stakeholder concerns are being heard and listened to, and that we can push forward on the Scrapie eradication program to make sure we get success. So as a general program summary, we have, since the start of the Scrapie program in 2003, we've seen a 90% decline in Scrapie. Currently, we face we did find some findings this year. We're at 0.0146% of a measure of prevalence, and that's that 90% decline. But as anybody that's done remodeling or projects or any type of projects, it's always that last 10% that always is the hardest. It's always that last 10% that takes the most time and the most effort to get to the final completion. And that's where we need you. We need our stakeholders. We need our states. We need our producers to participate in the program and to stay vigilant. Just because we've gotten through the 90%, we can't slack and let it go. We got to continue forward because it's that last 10% that's always the hardest to get to completion. And with that, as we continue our surveillance and continue our surveillance activities, we did see a small increase this year in Scrapie findings, but that increase was not statistically significant due to the sample sizes that were collected this year. We've had some recent changes in our data management. BS is utilizing surveillance collaboration services, SCS now, for our reporting Scrapie activities. And we are looking at formatting those reports right now. So there may be a lag, so states and stakeholders know there may be a lag in some of our data management that comes out of the Scrapie program because we are working on formatting those reports due to the transfer over and collection date and the collection of that data. We anticipate those reports will be completed by April, which it's April now, but we're working with that and we're trying to make sure we still capture that information in a way that is beneficial to you as stakeholders. The next part, as I worked with Diane going through the slides, there's a lot of graphs in the presentations, and that's kind of new to me. I usually do more talking points and slides versus a lot of graphs. So when I asked Diane how to explain and go through these graphs, and it was kind of funny. She just says, "Well, I usually just go through all this and just say and go through it real quick." And it's like, well, I want to try to explain a little bit because I'm used to, when I write my presentation, I'm used to giving talking points and things. You guys are smiling, so you must be used to seeing that chart there. But this is kind of a graph of our Scrapie Solar Surveillance Program. And you can notice that this year, this is a fiscal year 13, this is overall since 2003, we've had that big decline. But we've seen these little blips, and we're probably going to see that go out. If you look at epidemiology and the curves and how they kind of go when you get to the end of the eradication programs. I come from swine, I have that swine background, and when we got pseudorabies down, you used to see those little blips, and they used to go in and out and all along. So as stakeholders, we need to expect to see these. We need to stay vigilant, though, so we can capture it all the way down. And with that comes our education and participation from all of our producers to make sure we can keep this going and keep that curve down so it doesn't go back up and keep it going. But that blip that we do see is not statistically significant due to that sample size. And due to the data capture that we have in the Scrapie program, which is really good that we can separate all this out between our molted colors and our black face sheeps and know where we have that sample size, we can see that, or we can see what colors are we're going. We can see where those little blips are, and we can see where that little uptrend is right there, where we're finding those positives. And it's important to get that data so we can show you as the stakeholders how important it is to make sure we have good records and that record keeping and ID and all these animals. For the regulatory Scrapie slaughter surveillance program, we have sites where we're collecting samples, and this is just a general map showing where all of our slaughter plants are that we're collecting samples for the Scrapie program. We're collecting in 39 states. We're sending it to 12 laboratories. So we have good representation of our slaughter samples to make sure we get those sample collections so we can continue finding it. And this is kind of showing where some of the larger plants are. There's larger plants in Michigan where there's a lot of halal plants and things like that. There's larger plants in Colorado Utah is where there are large sheep kills. And then there's some of these other lines are just smaller sheep kills on the number of samples collected. And that kind of goes with the size of slaughter plant, where the slaughter industries are. And so it's kind of a good representation to show, yeah, we are collecting in 39 states, but the majority of our collections are in those few states, and then it's kind of scattered out. But how does that look overall among all the U.S.? And this is kind of showing that even though we are collecting in just 39 states, we are getting samples from all of the U.S., from every state. So those slaughter plants do have that geographic coverage to make sure we're collecting samples from all states in the U.S. But that's not saying that that's a perfect system. There is still work to do. There is still efforts that we need to continue. And you can see there's some states where our collections are not necessarily, when we compare that to the NAHMS data on the number of sheep and goats in the state, and the number that should be ID'd, and the number that should be going to slaughter, compare that to the NAHMS data, we have some states that are kind of lagging behind. And I'll get into that a little bit later. So there's still work that we need to do to continue forward to make sure we keep that trend going downward. This slide is kind of just a slide of our slaughter surveillance samples collected by month. And it's staying very similar to what it's done in the years past. It's just kind of an overall representation that we are collecting samples, and it's matching up with the years past. And this last year we actually probably overall collected more samples, because this last bar is actually higher. The light blue bar is usually a little higher than the purple bar there. So we're doing very well collecting slaughter samples, but we need to continue that effort to make sure we can continue the program moving forward. This slide is one that Diane put in to look at our slaughter surveillance samples collected all the way from 2003 through fiscal year 2003, but it separates it out by blackface and other color sheep, so we just kind of see a graphical representation of what color sheep are we collecting. And we've learned that our blackface sheep are more prone to scrapie, so we're targeting blackface sheep more than we're targeting our white, malted, and other color sheep. And that's why that black bar, or the light blue, dark blue bar on the screen up there is showing up higher than those other color sheep, because it's not necessarily that there's that many more sheep out there that are black-faced. It's that we're targeting towards that black-faced sheep more to make sure we can find those scrapie animals, where scrapie's more common there. And we also do on-farm surveillance. So we have our two surveillance sites. We have our regulatory slaughter collections, and we have our on-farm slaughter collections, on-farm surveillance collection. And this graph is a geographical representation by month of how we're collecting on-farm samples and the number of samples that we've collected each month for sheep and goats. And you'll notice in August and September of fiscal year 13, there's been a large increase in our on-farm samples. And when I was talking with Diane, I go, Diane, what's happened here at the very end? And she goes, well, that's because we've had some large herd depopulations where we've actually gone out, tested the farms, on-farm, and did some herd depopulations for some scrapie-infected farms. So that's why you see the large increase there in August and September of fiscal year 13. And when we look at the percent of sampling, minimum achieved, and this is where I was saying earlier, due to our slaughter surveillance collection, and this is when we combine slaughter surveillance and on-farm surveillance together, there are some areas, when we compare it to the statistical data out there, there are some areas where we still have some work that needs to be done. And these states in the red, these states in the green, these states in the light blue, are states where we might be missing, or have the opportunity, I should say, to improve our ID, improve to try to identify where the sheep might be going. Are we missing a slaughter plant where they're going somewhere? Are they doing on-farm slaughter? Or is there some custom slaughter things that we may need to look at? And this is where we need your guys' help as stakeholders and states to identify these so we can continue the scrapie program forward. Because we still have states where we need to improve our collection numbers when we base it off the NAHMS data. Now, maybe the NAHMS data isn't correct. There's other things to look at too. And maybe the numbers are off from one or another. Or industry has changed since the 2007 NAHMS data that was probably used for this. And the numbers aren't accurate anymore. There's many variables we need to look at, and that's some things we can work on together to make sure that we can kind of get this map into the dark blue. so we have good surveillance coverage. This is the same map, looking at goats versus just sheep, and looking at the percent recommended goat sampling minimum achieved in 2013. Again, there are areas where we can have those improvements, whether it's ID, whether it's looking at our current numbers, whether it's is there a local on-farm slaughter or custom slaughter plants where we may be able to collect. There are opportunities for us to work together with our stakeholders to try to identify where those animals are going, so we can get all these into the dark blue areas, so we can continue that effort on our slaughter surveillance program. As I move forward and kind of talking, I'm kind of switching gears from our slaughter surveillance to what have we found this year. So this slide is kind of a representation throughout the years of our number of infected animals versus our source flock. So I'm moving into actual infections now. And this is through February 28th, because that's when Diane sent me the presentation. And it's kind of showing our status and members. So this fiscal year is not complete. It's just for the first quarter on that bar there. And we're still finding Scrapie infected animals. Even this fiscal year we found some. You can see the blip for fiscal year 13 that was talked about. That's that little bar there. What will fiscal year 14 show? And that's where we work with you to see how to continue our collaboration efforts together. And it's giving you the source herds and the infected number there. And when we look at on a geographical representation of the whole U.S., you know, in fiscal year 13 we had 3 source infected flocks, 8 new source flocks, and 3 new infected flocks out of that. And you can see that they are scattered around the U.S. From Oregon, Arizona, Oklahoma, and some of these states are states that we were low ones in slaughter surveillance on. These states especially, and other states around there. So there's still opportunities out there for us to continue our Scrapie eradication efforts. And this slide is basically showing our fiscal year 14 to date. So we're only 3 months, or this would be 5 months into the fiscal year through February of 28th. And we've already identified four different flocks. One's a source flock and three new infected flocks. One of them has both sheep and goats, and that was in Iowa on those herds. So we found one in Iowa and Ohio are those 2 states that we've identified Scrapie so far this year in source flocks. And with that, when we have findings, there's always carryover. There's carryover of how have we completed the investigations of the previous herds that we found? Have we been able to close those herds out? Have we removed the Scrapie infection from those herds? And this map is just showing you a map of open statuses. So open statuses mean is that the case has not been closed completely yet in these states. So these are kind of looking at our current activities that we in VS are working on to help remove and eradicate, depopulate Scrapie on these farms that we currently know that are infected. So we're working on these farms in Iowa, Illinois, Ohio, and Oregon to remove the Scrapie infection from them. And that's current as of February 28th on the open statuses. Dan put this in here for just to let you know on the confirmed cases in 2014. So far we've had a total of 23 identifications. 22 of those were field cases, and one of them was an RSS case. So the field case identification is finding those, and that's coming out of, some of them are from the same herd, like that Iowa one, where all 7 of those were identified from a herd, and that was all goats. And so we are still finding Scrapie out there, and the goats is becoming more and more important, and I'll get into the talk about the regulatory side of that here shortly.
Pardon my ignorance, what's the difference between a source and an infected flock?
That's the question is what is the difference between source flock and infected flock? Source flock is where it comes from as your main herd. This is to my knowledge. Source flock is like a trace out. So you have your first identification, and that would be their source flock, and if there's trace outs to that, you can still have more infected herds, but they source back and forth. I don't know if I made that clear or not.
So an infected flock is it your source flock is where you trace back the positive animal, And then if they've sold animals to another flock,
Yes, and that flock is infected too. That is correct. That's right. That's right. Correct. This slide is a representation of Scrapie cases in goats. And it's, sorry about, did you notice my hands, I still got this head cold that has continued for a week, and I had an ear infection over the weekend, and my hearing is so, I have hearing problems as it is anyway. With the cold on top, I'm fighting, trying to hear very well. Scrapie cases are again 41 field cases that we've identified, and this is in goats. The slide's in goats. So that kind of gives you an overview of this is from 2002 to 2014. And some of these, we're finding in goats. This was all one herd. Diane let me know. This was the most recent positive in goats, and that's all, again, all in one herd that we've identified those cases. And kind of let you know that we are still finding Scrapie, and we're finding a lot of it in goats right now. So our Scrapie eradication program is working, and we need to stay vigilant to make sure that we continue that identification of those. I'm kind of switching gears here to kind of some of the program activities. And since I've given you the update on what we've been finding, now I'm kind of moving into the policy side of things and our writing of the policies. Over the last few years, we've been looking at revising the Scrapie flock certification program, Scrapie-free certification program, sorry. It's a monitored program for producers out there so they can get a monitored status. We've made those modifications here recently where we've eliminated the complete monitored category, and that was done due to various purposes, and I'll tell you about those purposes here in a little bit. But we revised the select category, and we now have the export category, and it provides opportunities for producers to do an exports. We still have the export monitored, the export certified. All of those are still, if you're a producer that wants that classification, if you follow the rules, you can still get that posted on the internet so all of our stakeholders still know that you're a certified herd. But it provides us more value. There were issues with the previous program. When we had that complete monitored herd, a lot of these herds are in here, but the rules weren't that strict, and we were finding actually Scrapie positive herds within this complete monitored. So we weren't providing you value to the states and stakeholders when we have a monitored herd and we say we're monitored, yet we're finding Scrapie positives in them monitored herds. The program wasn't working as it was designed. So we looked at that, we worked with you together to try to find those issues and make the program better so we can actually look at, now we have the two sides, export monitored and selective, to try to make the program more valuable. So when we say it's a monitored herd for a Scrapie-free program, that it really is Scrapie-free, because we don't want to be finding Scrapie positives out of those complete monitored herds. And so now we have those two, the select and export. And Peter will probably talk about all the export side here in a little bit on the Scrapie. And I don't know if our slides are overlapping or not, but here we got the two parts of the revised structure here. This is kind of showing the flocks, and we made that change. We've seen a big decrease in our number of flocks into the certified program. There again, our rules became more stringent. We have more activities that you have to do to become a export monitored herd or export certified herd. But that helped we make sure that our program stays true. So when we say we're a Scrapie-free certified herd, we're really a Scrapie-free certified herd because you're following the rules. And you have done the testing to prove that versus being just a monitored herd before, and we were still finding those positive cases out of those herds. So it provides more value to you as a stakeholder when that name's on the internet saying you're a Scrapie-free monitored herd. So the Scrapie flock certification program, there again, this is kind of giving you the listings of producers by state. Just tells you that so far we have 439 total enrolled flocks in the Scrapie flock certification program, and that kind of gives you a geographical overview of where those states, where those producers are that are participating in that. Good geographic representation. And now I'm going to go over some things that Diane said you guys were fully aware of, but we need to make sure that all stakeholders are aware that the Scrapie program and those of us in veterinary services are pursuing forward changes to our regulatory side of the Scrapie eradication program. we need to make sure that parts CFR 954 and 79 are revised to meet your needs as stakeholders, to make them more flexible, to make them more efficient, to make them science-based. We need to have that flexibility in these regulations to allow the program to continue to move forward as the industry changes, allow the program to move forward as we reduce our Scrapie program numbers down to that end. We need to make sure the program stays vigilant as through. So some of the major items that are currently in process right now, we're awaiting publication. It's in review right now, and that review process can take time. I cannot give you a date on when that'll actually publish in the Federal Register for stakeholder comment. But the major items of the rule changes include giving the administrator flexibility to relieve those requirements. Those requirements including looking at or making sure we're not having a significant risk to disease transmission, increasing our flexibility on how investigations occur. We want to use a science-based approach in our Scrapie eradication program. We can add that genetic-based approach into the regulation. We have the science, we need to add it to the regulation. The regulation changes takes a long time. So when we do this, we need to make it as flexible as possible so we can add the science in as it comes. Consistency is always a major concern among all of our states. We want to stay consistent. I would say if I was a state veterinarian and if I had different rules for goats than I did for sheep on ID requirements, that would be hard to explain to producers. And so we're trying to make our ID requirements very similar to facilitate sheep, to make the sheep and goat ID requirements the same, and make them and keep. And so that way everyone understands what those requirements are. There's nothing more confusing than have different requirements for different species. And so we're looking at those changes out there to make the goat requirements the same as sheep. Required states continue with our surveillance efforts. We need to continue our surveillance goals, tighten up that definition of slaughter channels, expand the ID requirements to all sexually intact animals, unless moving to a group lot, limit the use of tattoos, and establish record-keeping requirements. Many of these are very similar to what we're doing now. We're just trying to make them more consistent, tighten them up a little bit, make them more flexible, where we need to add that science-based approach in to help you as stakeholders and you as our producers out there. We're also working on, I'm assuming Peter will talk about, our changes to the imported sheep and goats for our APHIS regulatory changes to make us more compliant with what the OIE guidelines are. So we are currently working on drafting a proposed rule for the imported sheep and goats, their embryos and their products to help mitigate the risk of Scrapie. That is very similar to what the OIE. We want to make sure our producers and our people that want to import sheep and goats in the U.S. can bring them sheep and goats in, having current regulations and guidelines that meet the OIE. So our thinking is looking at breeding animals, using those OIE standards that are established out there to allow maybe genetically resistant sheep and genetically less susceptible rams in the U.S. as our prevalence reaches 0, because our prevalence is really going down. We want to utilize those OIE requirements for slaughter animals and feeding animals coming in the U.S. There again, we want to make sure our producers and our stakeholders can utilize those requirements to the best of their opportunity to help them and not be inhibited by regulations that may be outdated. And so we're trying to make those changes to match the OIE requirements. Scrapie mitigations for embryos, we want our regulations to be similar to the OIE standards, so we're currently working on drafting that language and working on products to make sure that the products have no Scrapie restrictions on there is the current thinking that's out there. But there again, we need your input. You guys are the stakeholders, and we need to understand your perspective of things for the sheep and goat industries out there. So the BSE mitigations that were applied a long time ago, we need to make sure that they're compliant and that they apply those prohibitions on the processed animal proteins, such as meat and bone meals, so we still have those protections out there. If we make our regulations less strict on imported things, we still want to provide that protection to you guys as stakeholders and protection of all of our industries, whether it's sheep and goats and cattle. to make sure that they comply with the BSE comprehensive rule. We want to apply those same standards to tallow and other feed additives that are derived from cattle too, and release some of those restrictions on other products that may be coming into the U.S. Also in veterinary services, switching gears again, moving off our regulatory happenings that Peter is working on and others in import animals and that we're working on in programs, I want to talk about some things other activities that we are doing to provide value to you guys as stakeholders out there. You know, one of the great things about USDA is we provide a lot of information to all of our stakeholders. Information on our species groups, information that not only you guys use, but academia use, and one of those things is the NAHMS sheep studies. And NAHMS studies for any species, whether it's dairy studies, swine studies, they provide value to academia, industry, on what's actually going on and what kind of improvements and what are producers doing out there. What are they using? How are they modifying their industries? And that the third national sheep study, which was completed in 2011, our folks in BS are still out there working on those with the purpose of providing comprehensive animal health information to help U.S. stakeholders, whether it's disease prevention, animal welfare, production, what are you using for environmental and economic consequences. It's capturing all that type of information to provide you guys value. The sheep study in 2011, this is probably old news to you because it's been out since 2011, had 22 states represented in those studies and split off into 3 different regions there, the East, Waukee Central, and Eastern Central. And out of that, they have now completed the 4th part of the study. So they're continually updating their website, providing new reports to provide value to U.S. stakeholders. And so my main goal of this slide is to let you know, please always continue looking at the APHIS NAHMS website because they're always updating reports to provide you value out of what that study does. And their most recent addition was the changes in health production practices out there. So make sure that you continue with those. Continue looking at our website for those updates so that we can make sure we're providing value to you.